Chapter 18. Ever since Elsie had made the decision to make love to Gabe, she became intensely aware of time and just how little she had. One minute he was making love to her in the early morning light on Monday. The next they were leaving Ash Wednesday Mass to go to her appointment with Dr. Rose. And the next it was Thursday morning on the train to New Jersey. She was nervous. Although he had assured her that another incident like the one with Nick wouldn't occur, she couldn't help but worry. "Tell me about your home, your family." "I've already told you about my family." "Tell me again. Tell me more." "Home. Well, my parents moved into their house in Hamilton, New Jersey the year after they were married. They wanted a large family, and they started right away. I was born during their first year there." "Is it a big house? A little house?" "Little. It's a classic Cape Cod." "What's that?" "Well, it's a kind of house that was commonly built in a place called Cape Cod. It's sort of a cute little box house. Typically, Cape Cods have a kitchen, dining room, living room, one bedroom, and a bathroom on the main level, and 2 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs. It's kind of perfect for a little family." "And they filled it up?" "Not right away. I think my mother must have had some trouble, maybe a miscarriage, or even 2. I'm not certain, and it isn't the kind of thing she would ever talk about. But my brother Joseph didn't come along until I was 4. After that there was a new Soldani every 2 years. First Nick, then Anthony, we call him Tony, and finally Luke." "When was Angie born?" Gabe smiled. "When Mom was expecting Luke, it was pretty obvious she wanted a girl. She started redecorating one of the bedrooms as a nursery, which was kind of funny, because Tony was only a year and a half, still very much a baby, and the bedroom he and Nick shared was essentially a nursery. She redecorated anyway, and while it wasn't pink, the nursery had a definite feminine flair. But another Soldani brother was born." "Was she very disappointed?" "No, but she still wanted a little girl. Don't get me wrong, she loves her sons with everything in her, and she never would have said anything. But I was getting old enough to notice things." "Like what?" "Like when she'd be shopping in a department store and stop to admire little dresses, or gaze wistfully down the doll aisle of the toy store, while her 5 boys only had eyes for cars and action figures. But after Luke, she didn't get pregnant again for years. Then it happened, and on Christmas Eve, 5 years after Luke was born, Angela Rose graced the world. I was 15 at the time, and just like everyone else in the family, she wrapped me around her little finger from the first moment I saw her." "Wrapped you around her finger?" He laughed. "It means we adored her, and would move heaven and earth to make her happy." "Except wear princess crowns." "Well, yeah, on our heads at least." He grinned. "Actually, she is a surprisingly sweet girl, considering how we spoiled her. But Mom always said you can't actually spoil a child with love." "I wouldn't think so. How old is Angela now?" "She's 18, and a senior in high school." Elsie sort of knew what that meant, because she had a basic understanding of modern schooling. "So the house did fill up?" "Yep. After Nick, my dad finished the basement, making a rec room where their rowdy sons could play." Elsie wasn't sure what a basement or a rec room was, but she was getting better at reading context clues. It was obviously a place to play. "After Tony was born, they built an addition on the back of the house, making a master bedroom with a bathroom upstairs, and enlarging the kitchen and dining room into a great room downstairs. The downstairs bedroom became the guest room." "Did you have a lot of guests?" He laughed. "Hardly any. Overnight guests, anyway. We have a lot of extended family, but most of them live within an hour's drive. Before we had a guest room, on the rare occasion that we did have overnight visitors, my brothers and I got to sleep in sleeping bags on the floor of the rec room. We liked doing that." It sounded much like the way people working in the castle slept every night, on a pallet on the floor of the Great Hall. When Mom became pregnant with Luke, she wanted a nursery, so she moved Joey and I into the downstairs bedroom and put Tony and Nick in our bedroom. "No more guest bedroom?" "Nope, but like I said, it didn't matter." "Tell me about your parents." "My dad is an electrician, and my mom took care of our home and family." "Isn't that normally what a wife and mother does?" He frowned at her. "Some mothers do, but most have other jobs too, like your mother." He told her more about his family and what growing up with them was like. He talked about going to Catholic schools and big Italian family parties and being a kid in the suburbs. Before long, the train rolled into Hamilton Station. She looked around. This was definitely not the city. "How do we get to your house?" "Someone's going to pick us up." He glanced at his watch. "It won't be Luke or Angela. School isn't over." "Is Luke still in school?" "Sadly, yes." Gabe's eyes twinkled with mirth. "But now he's a teacher, in our old high school. Angela hates it. She gets away with nothing." "Gabe!" someone called as they walked out of the station. Gabe grinned. "It's Joe! Hey, Joey!" he yelled to a man leaning against a rather beat-up car. It only took a moment for Elsie to register Joey's clothes. "He's a priest?" "Didn't I mention that?" "No," she hissed. "Well, he's a priest. Come on, I'll introduce you." When they got to the car, Gabe hugged his brother. "It's good to see you, Joe. I've missed you the last few times I've been home." "It's good to see you, too." "Elizabeth, this is my brother, Joe." "It's nice to meet you, Father." "It's okay to just call me Joe. By your stunned expression, I figured Gabe thought this would be a fun surprise." "Springing my priest brother on people is always fun." Joe just looked at her and rolled his eyes with a what-can-you-do expression. Gabe ruffled Joe's hair, which was thick and bushy. "I bet Mom loves this." "How do you get away with long curls and a beard, and I get, 'Joseph, when are you going to get a haircut?' Just wait. I came straight here before stopping at the house. She'll say it as soon as she sees me." "First, my long hair is cute, and yours is, well, not. It's so bushy you could make a topiary out of it." "Thanks." "You asked. And what's the other reason?" "I would have thought you'd have learned this by now. I'm just a doctor who saves children's lives. You, little brother, are a priest. Appearances must be maintained." Joe laughed. "Get in the car." The drive to the Soldani house only took a few minutes. Since arriving in the 21st century, Elsie had only experienced New York City. Loud, crowded, bustling New York City. She had seen suburban areas on the television, but they paled in comparison to this pleasant reality. The street where they lived looked much more like a village than a city, and she instantly fell in love. The little house Gabe had described was huge by medieval standards, and even compared to his apartment, but tiny compared to the Sinclair's penthouse. Gabe's mum was in the kitchen. She was a shorter woman than Elizabeth, with dark hair and dark eyes, which Elsie was sure never missed anything. She hugged both of her sons, but just as Joe predicted, she said, "Joseph, when are you going to get a haircut?" She flicked her hand lightly against the side of his head. "Brutto." "Mom, I'm a grown man and a priest, for the love of God. I can let my hair grow if I want to." "But you don't want to. Trust me on this, it's not a good look for you." Gabe looked like he was trying desperately not to laugh, but he failed. His mother flicked his head in the same way. "Don't be rude to your brother." She turned her attention to Elsie. "Elizabeth, I know you don't remember me, but I'm Gabriel's mother." "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Soldani." Elsie offered her hand. "We don't shake hands," she said bluntly, opening her arms for a hug. There was something so warm and motherly about it that Elsie didn't want to let go. When she did, Mrs. Soldani smiled and patted her cheek, then became all business. "Gabe, you can take Elizabeth's things up to Angela's room." "Mom, I just thought we'd—" "If the next words out of your mouth are going to be, 'sleep in my old room,' don't even bother. Joseph is spending the night, so the two of you will be in the guest room, and Nick can sleep on one of the extra beds in Luke's room." "Mom, I'm a grown man and a doctor." "And not married to her." Gabe looked to Joe for support. Joe barked a laugh. "You must be joking. First, I'm a grown man and a priest, and she tells me when to cut my hair, so I'm not sure why this would surprise you. Second, I'm a priest, and I'm duty-bound to agree with her." A joyful laugh built deep within Elsie and came bubbling forth. Times might have changed, but evidently not that much. Gabe, this is not a battle you can win, my love. Show me where Angela's room is. When Luke and Angie got home from school, Angie immediately latched on to Elizabeth. She asked a never-ending stream of questions, finally declaring, "You can't remember anything but Gabe? I think that is so romantic." "Angie, sta zitta. I'm just being friendly." "Friendly before she has one question answered. You ask two more. Give the girl a chance to breathe." Angie huffed and then brightened immediately. "Hey, I need to go to the store. You want to come with me?" Elsie smiled. "I'd love to." "Be sure to fasten your seatbelt, Elizabeth," warned Luke. "Shut up. I'm a good driver." "Tell that to the mirror you knocked off when you hit the recycling bin," said Joe. "That was over a year ago when I was just learning, and Dad kept saying I was too close to the middle of the road." Gabe shook his head. "Stop it, guys. She's a good driver." "Thank you, Gabe. At least I have one nice brother." She wrinkled up her nose and stuck out her tongue at Joe and Luke. "You're welcome." Gabe winked at Elsie. "But do fasten your seatbelt, sweetheart." Angie frowned. "Gabe." "What? It's the law." "Stop teasing your sister," said their mother, who took a set of keys from her purse and gave them to Angie. "You can take the minivan and pick Nick up on your way back. His train gets in at 5:30. Don't be late. We are having dinner at 6, right after your dad gets home." "Okay, Mom." Angie drove Elsie to a place she called the Mall. It wasn't tall like buildings in New York, but it covered a huge area and was surrounded by a parking lot. Inside were many stores of varying sizes. "I just wanted to go to the card store to get Gabe a birthday card. I made his gift." "What is a birthday card?" "Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot you don't remember some things. It's a card that, it's easier to show you than tell you." When they reached the card store, Elsie understood. There were cards for every imaginable occasion, expressing a variety of sentiments. The guys always get jokey cards, like "Happy Birthday to the world's okayest brother," but I like nice cards. "Do you have a card for him? The boyfriend birthday cards are there." She pointed to another rack. Elsie nodded and went to look at them. She figured out "Happy Birthday" because it was on nearly every card. That was about the limit of her reading skills, and she didn't want to ask Angie to read them to her. Having Gabe's sister help pick out a boyfriend card for Elsie to give him didn't feel right. But as Elsie looked, she found some beautiful cards that only had "Happy Birthday" on the front and were blank inside. She could manage to write a few words. The picture on one was a bird in a nest. She smiled to herself. Only she knew what it meant, but that was the card she bought. As they left the store, Elsie remembered something. "Angie, you said you made Gabe a gift. Is it customary to give someone a gift on their birthday?" "Man, you really have forgotten everything." "Yeah, people get gifts on their birthday. I made him a collage of photos from when we were younger. He had his guitar or mandolin in almost every picture I found. So I wrote, 'Music is the voice of the soul,' on the matting." Elsie frowned. "I don't have anything to give him." Angie looked thoughtful for a moment. "I'm sure he doesn't expect anything from you, but I know something little that you could give him, something he really likes, but we have to drive to a different store." She glanced at her watch. "We have just enough time." Angie took her to a huge store that seemed to sell everything. "You have your choice. He really likes these chocolates called baci. That means kiss in Italian." Angie grinned, and Elsie blushed. She took Elsie to another aisle. "He also likes these shortbread cookies. Mom doesn't buy them very often because they're a little pricey compared to other cookies, but they are really good." Elsie took Elizabeth's wallet from her purse. "I hate to ask this, but I'm not good with money yet. Do I have enough to buy both?" Angie looked in the wallet, laughed, and said, "Yeah, you have way more than enough." After paying for the treats, Angie drove to the train station. "I'm taking the back way. Traffic on Route 1 will be crazy now, and Mom will kill me if we're late." They weren't at the train station yet when Angie said, "Darn, it's 5:30 now, and we're about 5 minutes away." Here's hoping the train is late." When they pulled into Hamilton Station about 5 minutes later, Nick was waiting in front. Angie stopped the van, pushed a button, and the side door opened. Nick shook his head. "Hi, Elizabeth. Angie, I should have known you'd be the one picking me up when no one was here." He put his overnight bag in the back, pushed a button inside the van to close the side door, and walked around to Angie's door. "I'll drive." "No, I'm driving." "Get in the back, Angie. Elizabeth may have a death wish, but I don't." "I'm driving, Nick. Mom said I could." He stared at her, arching one eyebrow. "I can stand here all evening." Angie's chin began to tremble. "I'm a good driver." "Come on, Angie, don't cry." She continued to sit there, her eyes filling with tears. Nick huffed. "Fine, you can drive." As he closed her door and walked around to get in the back, Angie cast a sly look at Elsie and winked. It was all Elsie could do to contain her laughter. Wrapped around her little finger, indeed. Chapter 19. Gabe always enjoyed time with his family, but this birthday had been one of the best in years. There was no mystery as to why. Elizabeth being there and fitting in so smoothly with his family was what made it most memorable. Nick left at the crack of dawn to make it to his office by 8, but Gabe and Elizabeth took a late morning train to avoid the rush-hour crowds. It was a blustery cold day, and with a large bag of leftovers and other homemade delicacies, as well as several bulky birthday presents, Gabe decided to take a cab back to the apartment. Once they were inside, he'd barely put down his things before he pulled Elizabeth into his arms and kissed her until she was flustered and breathless. "I've wanted to do that for ages." She laughed. "Ages? We haven't been gone a full day." "But I have gotten quite used to having you in my arms. I'm sorry Mom made you sleep in Angie's room." She swatted at his chest. "Gabe, did you really think your mother would do anything else?" He shrugged. "Nothing ventured, nothing gained. I guess I'm going to have to ask you to marry me soon." Christ almighty, did those words just come out of my mouth? He hadn't considered marriage to anyone since, well, years. I mean, not immediately, but soon. She rested her head against his chest and said, "I'm sure you'll know when the time is right." Wow. She didn't jump on his declaration or slam on the brakes. "At the moment, the time is right to take you to the edge of bliss and let you teeter on the precipice until you beg me to send you over." "No, at the moment the time is right to put away the delicious food your mother sent with us." She ducked under his arm and made to grab the bag he had dropped on the floor. He looped an arm round her waist, pulling her back against him. He kissed her neck and then sucked her earlobe before nipping it lightly. "You are the most delicious thing I brought home." She laughed. 5 minutes. He growled. "Fine. 5 minutes." His gaze followed her into the kitchen. He'd intended to help her, but the sight of her exquisite ass in snug jeans mesmerized him. He imagined one round cheek in each hand as he buried himself in her. To him she was flawless, soft and round where she should be, amazingly responsive, and surprisingly uninhibited. He'd been her first, and there hadn't been many before her in his life. They had been, for the lack of a better term, friendly fucks, intended to make everyone feel good, but with no deep emotional attachment. He believed Elizabeth was the first and perhaps only girl he had ever made love to. Even so, the connection between them now was beyond anything he'd experienced with her before. She shut the refrigerator door and turned to face him. "What are you doing?" "Looking at perhaps the most perfect ass God has ever made." "Stop teasing." "I'm absolutely serious. In fact, there's only one thing wrong with it." "What's that?" "It isn't naked." "Oh, well, as much as I strive for perfection, I find it a little difficult sometimes with this." She waved her casted arm. "Perhaps you'd like to help." He groaned and grew even harder. I think I'd like that very much. She took a step toward the bedroom, looked over her shoulder with a sly grin, and twitched her hips. He arched an eyebrow. And just where do you think you're going? Into the bedroom, in the pursuit of perfection. Oh, no, you don't. Stay right where you are. He stepped toward her from behind, reaching around her waist to unbutton her jeans and unzip them slowly. You don't mean to undress me here? She squeaked. In the kitchen? That's exactly what I mean to do. He hooked his thumbs in the waistbands of her jeans and panties, easing them over her hips and down to her knees. Lean over onto the counter. Gabe, This is all in the pursuit of perfection. He cupped the cheeks of her luscious ass in his hands and nuzzled the back of her neck. Do it, he whispered in her ear. She leaned forward until her stomach was against the edge of the counter, her hands resting on the surface. Good girl. He went down on one knee and lifted her left foot from the floor. He untied the laces of her boot, pulling it from her foot. He removed her sock and then stroked his thumb up the center of her foot. She squealed and jerked her foot, but her jeans trapped her legs. You're wicked. He laughed, nipping one cheek and causing her to squeal again. He placed her bare left foot onto the floor and repeated everything with the right foot. She started to straighten up and remove her jeans the rest of the way. Gabe stood, grabbed her arms gently, and placed them back onto the counter. Not yet, precious. His hands returned to her creamy thighs, massaging them and moving ever higher. He brushed his fingers ever so lightly over her mound, gratified to hear her sharp intake of breath. He continued his slow exploration, stroking her center lightly, coming ever nearer, but never quite reaching the spot. She squirmed, trying to push against his hand. He took his hand away. Not yet. He reached around her, unbuttoning her blouse and allowing his hands to roam over her bra. He slipped his fingers under the edge of the lacy garment and lightly squeezed her nipples, eliciting a moan of pleasure. These are nearly perfect, too. Shall we add them to our pursuit? Yes, she said breathlessly, and that was all he needed. He unhooked her bra and then pulled her away from the counter. Raise your arms. She did, and he pulled her blouse and bra off, dropping them on the floor. He pushed gently on the small of her back until she was leaning on the counter again. Almost, he whispered. She gave a mewling moan. And so needy. I'll see what I can do to fix that. He slid her jeans to her ankles and removed them, spreading her legs wider when they were free of constraint. So very beautiful. He massaged her ass and then her breasts. Perfection. His right hand slid down her belly and cupped her mound. Absolute perfection, he whispered, as his finger slipped between her legs and circled her apex. She drew in a ragged breath, trembling with desire. Just as she was about to climax, he took his hand away and stepped back. "Gabe!" she practically wailed. "Don't move." He kicked his shoes off and removed his shirt before moving close again. A shiver ran through her body. "Let me see if I can warm you up." Again he let his hands slide over her body until he reached her clit. She panted and arched her head back. So close. He moved his hand away, stepping back one more time. "No, please." She started to turn. "Stay as you are. Don't move. We're almost there." He pulled off his jeans and briefs, pausing long enough to sheathe himself in a condom from his wallet. He turned her around and lifted her onto the counter. He wouldn't tease her any longer. He lowered his mouth to her, licking and sucking on the swollen nub until she was at the edge once more. He straightened and entered her in one hard stroke. She cried out as her orgasm overcame her. Locking her legs around him as he thrust into her, she rode the waves of her climax even as another built. He was perilously close to his own orgasm when he whispered, "Come for me now." She threw her head back and soared into ecstasy with another cry, taking him with her. He wasn't sure how long they stood like that, completely spent. But when his brain began to function again, he lifted her into his arms and carried her to their bed. Still in a haze of post-orgasmic bliss, he disposed of the condom and climbed into bed beside her. "Absolute perfection," he whispered, pulling her close. Perfection," she purred. Chapter 20. Saturday dawned cold but sunny. Knowing Gabe had to work that night, Elsie intended to let him sleep as long as possible, so she padded into the kitchen to make a much-needed pot of coffee. As it brewed, she glanced into the living room and grinned. Her small suitcase, Gabe's backpack, and the shopping bag containing his birthday gifts still lay where he dropped them by the door. After they recovered from the incredible kitchen counter sex, they revived long enough to eat his mother's homemade clam chowder while curled up on the couch in front of the television. Then they had another round of soul-shattering sex and slept in each other's arms for the rest of the night. Once fortified with coffee and a banana, oh, how she wished bananas grew in Scotland, she tidied up. She put the toiletries away in the bathroom, added the dirty clothes to the hamper, and started a load of laundry. Then she unpacked the bag containing Gabe's presents. His mom and dad had given him a new pair of trousers, a nice shirt, and a sweater. She would hang them in the bedroom closet after he woke. Angie's collage was beautiful. It was a wonderful thing to be able to take photographs and hold on to memories in such a tangible way. She thought about her parents. She couldn't remember what her father had originally looked like, and she only had fading memories of her mother. She knew with certainty that when she returned, her memories of what Joe and Aldous looked like would also eventually wane. And Gabe, with memories of him making love to her so vivid, she didn't want to believe that someday she would be unable to remember his face, his smile, the sparkle of his eyes. But if these emotions she felt were Elizabeth's, perhaps those memories would be even more fleeting. She looked at the words written so beautifully around the pictures. "Music is the voice of the soul." Her thoughts turned to Geordie and the night she had met him. He had said something about how much he loved to see the pleasure his music gave people. "When the tune leaves my fingers and reaches the hearts of those listening, it gives me joy. When it stirs their feet and they dance, becoming one with the melody, we are connected in an extraordinary way. It feeds my soul." Gabe's guitar stood in a stand in a corner of the living room, but she had never heard him play it. She would like to hear him play at least once before she had to leave. She sighed, laying the collage aside and pulling out the cookies and chocolates. She chuckled when she looked at them. She hadn't realized it when she purchased them, but the cookies had been made in Scotland, and the chocolates in Italy. It was really kind of perfect, but just like the card with the drawing of the bird in the nest, she was the only one who would ever know what it meant. She retrieved the card from the bag and opened it. She didn't know many words, but she had very carefully copied the words "Happy Birthday" on the inside of the card, and added, "Love, Elizabeth." There was so much more she wanted to say. "Thank you for taking care of me. Thank you for teaching me letters and numbers. Thank you for the day at the flower market. Thank you for pizza and pasta and bagels and bananas and peanut butter. Thank you for letting me glimpse this incredible love you have for Elizabeth." She tucked the card back in the envelope and put all of his birthday cards in a stack for him on the table. The last gift she removed was Luke's. He liked woodworking, and like Angie, he had made Gabe's present. It was a wall clock, the back of which he'd fashioned using old weathered wood. It was rustic and very beautiful. The rough wooden background reminded her of the knot representing the pocket watch, carved into the tree of life on the Sinclairs' doors. A tear slipped down her cheek as she looked at the clock. Time was passing. She couldn't stop it, and this was the first time she had allowed herself to admit that she didn't want to go back. ever. She didn't want to leave her parents, and she didn't want to leave Gabe. But it isn't you he loves, Elsie. At that thought, she couldn't hold back. She put her face in her hands and gave in to sorrow. She fought desperately not to sob, fearing that it would wake Gabe. Eventually she managed to regain control and stop the flow of tears. She washed her face, poured another cup of coffee, and put the laundry in the dryer. By the time Gabe awoke, all evidence of her breakdown was gone. Chapter 21. Elsie decided immediately that she didn't like it when Gabe worked nights. He had been gone for less than an hour based on Luke's clock, which Gabe had hung in the living room that afternoon. She tried doing some work in her workbooks, but couldn't concentrate. She tried watching television, but without Gabe to explain things, she didn't understand a lot. Eventually she went to bed, but without his comforting presence, she didn't sleep well. After waking nearly every hour throughout the night, she gave up just before dawn and got out of bed. She started the coffee brewing, wrapped her cast as best she could, and took a shower. A little before 8 in the morning, keys rattled in the lock as Gabe let himself in. He looked at her and frowned. "You look like you got less rest than I did. It was a quiet night, and I was able to get 2 short power naps. Did you sleep at all?" "Honestly, not much. I knew it would be hard not having you here, but it was worse than I thought. I'd say you could take a little nap with me today, but that might make it even harder for you to sleep tonight." Her heart fell. All she wanted was to crawl back into bed next to him now that he was home. "Let's go to Mass, and then maybe you should call the Sinclairs. You could go for a swim and have some stimulation, then meet me back here for an early dinner before I go to work." She didn't want to be away from him all day, but he was probably right, so when they returned from Mass, she did just that. Dixon arrived by 10:30. She kissed Gabe goodbye and left him to get what sleep he could in the darkened apartment. She enjoyed the day with the Sinclairs, and she had the opportunity to have a long talk with her mother about love and time travel. Dixon had her home by 5, just as Gabe was just waking up. They ate the leftovers from his birthday dinner. After he left, she cleaned up the dishes and stared at the empty apartment. Just as it had the night before, her anxiety rose as darkness fell. She finally forced herself to do some pages in her workbooks. At about 8, she nearly jumped out of her skin when the phone rang. She answered it tentatively. "Hello?" "Hello, darling, it's Mom. Hi. Are you all right?" "Yeah, fine. It's just Gabe isn't here. He's working nights, and I, aren't used to being alone?" "I guess not. Actually, that is why I called. I figured he was working nights this week, and I wanted to check on you." That completely surprised Elsie. "Thanks, I appreciate that. Are you okay alone?" "I didn't sleep well last night, but I'm really tired tonight. I think I'll be okay." "Well, if you need someone to talk to, just call. I don't care what time it is." "I don't want to bother you. I'm sure I'll be fine." "Darling, I do actually understand what you're going through. Your dad is a surgeon, remember? When he was on call, he often had to go to the hospital in the middle of the night. I hated it. I called my mother, of course." Elsie laughed. "Okay. I will call if I need you." "Good. Now, I also figure that with Gabe needing to sleep during the day, it might be good for you to get out. I've cleared my schedule tomorrow. There's a wonderful spa here in the Fitzwilliam. We can have the works." "I don't know exactly what a spa or the works are." "You'll love it. We'll have facials, salt scrubs, a full body massage, and top it off with manicures and pedicures." Pedicures? Elsie didn't know what the other stuff was, but Gabe had mentioned that his mom and sister loved pedicures. "Okay, that sounds great. Can I be home by 5? "You can be, but then you'll be sitting alone in an empty apartment for hours. Maybe we could have dinner together in my suite, and I'll see you home by bedtime." "I don't know. Whatever you want is fine, but see what Gabe thinks before you say no." "By all that's holy, Charlotte seems to be adapting." "Okay, I will." "Good. I'll send a car for you at 9. "Perfect. Then I'll say good night, and I'll see you tomorrow. But, darling, I mean it. Call if you need me." "I will. Good night." The phone rang again just after 10. "Hello?" "Hi, sweetheart." "Gabe." Her voice was heavy with relief. "I couldn't imagine who was calling this late. I had a few minutes, so I thought I'd call to check on you." "I'm glad you did." "Are you okay?" "I still wish you were here. I don't like being alone, but I'm okay." "I wish I was there, too. I think it'll get easier with time." "Time. There is again." "I'm sure it will. My mother called a little while ago." "Did she? Why?" Gabe tried not to let it show, but it was clear to Elsie that the tense relationship with her parents bothered him. "Actually, she called to commiserate with me. She said she figured you were working and that I might be missing you." "She did?" Elsie smiled at his incredulous tone. "Yeah, she did. She said she remembered what it was like when my father was called into the hospital at night. She liked it no better than I do." "Wow. I forgot that once upon a time, renowned thoracic surgeon James Quinn served call duty, just like we ordinary mortals." Elsie giggled. "Does it make him seem more human?" "A little." "My mom also said she cleared her schedule for tomorrow, so we can go to the spa for the works." "That's great. Just what you need. But be sure to tell the massage therapist that you have broken ribs." "That sounds ominous." "No, really, you'll love it. They just have to be very gentle when massaging over your broken ribs." "Okay, I'll tell them. I told my mother I wanted to be back by 5, but she suggested that I have dinner with her, so I have less time alone." "As much as I would love to see you before I go to work, I think she's right. I suspect the long evening alone is what makes you more anxious than anything else." "So you're okay with that?" "Absolutely." "Okay. Look, sweetheart, I have to go. Sleep tight, and I'll see you in the morning. I love you." "I love you too." After the day she spent with Charlotte, Elsie was forced to add one more thing to her list of remarkable 21st century things. Spa days. Elizabeth's mother and Gabe had been right. She had loved every minute of it. It was nearly 5:30 when she returned to Charlotte's suite that evening, feeling relaxed and pampered. Realizing that Gabe would be up and getting ready to leave for work soon, Elsie asked, "Would you mind if I gave Gabe a quick call?" "Not at all, darling. I'll just step out onto the balcony and enjoy the evening skyline." It was kind of Charlotte to give her privacy, but it was cold out, so Elsie didn't talk long. Gabe promised to try and call her after she was home. Elsie opened the sliding door to the balcony, thinking to join Charlotte for a minute, but as soon as she had taken the first step, she was gripped with a horrible fear of falling. Instinctively, she took a step back into the room. Charlotte turned toward her and smiled. "It looks like you haven't forgotten your fear of heights." That was clearly another of Elizabeth's memories pushing through, because Elsie had never been afraid of high places. "Don't worry, darling, I'm coming in. It's too cold to stay out here long anyway, and our dinner should be arriving soon. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of ordering for both of us. The chef prepares some excellent Middle Eastern dishes, and you've always been partial to exotic food." Elsie smiled. Well, she couldn't expect Charlotte to give up all control at once. "I'm sure it will be great." And it was. She thought nothing could be better than Italian food, and while she wouldn't admit it to Gabe, this came close. Charlotte also took the liberty of ordering drinks called lemon drop martinis. By everything that was good and holy, Elsie thought it might be the most wonderful drink she'd ever tasted. Charlotte raised her glass to Elsie. "Here's to spectacular mother-daughter spa days, and even more spectacular lemon drop martinis." Elsie tapped her glass against her mother's. "I'll drink to that." She'd heard someone say that on television and was chuffed to be able to use it. Charlotte frowned. Why have we never done this before? Maybe we were always too busy? I suppose so, but we should do it more often. I agree, I'm sure Elizabeth would love it. The words were out of her mouth before she could stop them. Keep talking. Maybe she didn't notice. Did you call this hummus? I really do like it. Do you know how to make it? What did you just say? Do you know how to make hummus? Before that. Well, just that I like the hummus. No, you said Elizabeth would love it. Did I? You know you did. What did you mean? I suppose it feels like Elizabeth is a different person, and when her memories, that is, my memories, come back, well, I'll be Elizabeth again. Elizabeth, look at me. Elsie, who had been looking anywhere but at Charlotte, finally made eye contact with her. Charlotte continued, I am a lawyer. Over the years I have learned how to recognize lies, especially when the person telling them isn't accustomed to lying. Now tell me again, what did you mean by Elizabeth would love it? Elsie didn't want to tell Elizabeth's mother about the pocket watch. She tried again. It's just as I said. It feels like Elizabeth is a different person. I'm sure it does. But feeling that way and actually internalizing it to the point that you refer to yourself as a separate individual are two completely different things. Fugue states are one symptom of dissociative identity disorder. I don't think believing that Elizabeth is a different person is a good sign. Have you expressed this to Dr. Rose? If not, we need to see him immediately. She pulled her phone from her pocket and started pushing the buttons. Elsie put a hand on Charlotte's arm to stop her. No, we don't. Dr. Rose is aware of why I think of Elizabeth as a different person. He understands it, and it isn't part of any disorder. How is that possible? Elsie sighed. What I'm about to tell you is going to be hard to believe. After I'm done, you will probably want to call Dr. Rose, and you can do that, but let me tell you first. Charlotte eyed her warily. All right, I'm listening. Promise that you'll let me finish the story before jumping to the conclusion that I've lost my mind? Elizabeth, darling, maybe it's better if we just call Dr. Rose. Please, I'm just asking you to suspend disbelief for a few minutes. Fine. I'll listen and try not to judge. Elsie nodded resolutely and launched into the story of the pocket watch, soul exchange, and time travel. For her part, Charlotte listened until Elsie reached the end of the story before saying anything. That's what you want me to believe? The soul of a 21-year-old peasant from 13th century Scotland has taken up residence in my daughter's body, and vice versa? That is what happened, and Dr. Rose believes this. If that's the case, I'm filing a malpractice suit and finding you another psychiatrist. Elsie sighed. Dr. Rose believes it because he has met Gertrude and used the pocket watch himself. Over the years, he has been called upon to counsel other time travelers. And you believe you are on a mission to bring Elizabeth and Dr. Soldani together. And by the way, if he is involved with this in any fashion, I will include him in the suit. Gabe is not involved. He doesn't know anything about this. He believes I am Elizabeth, and he loves her with his whole heart. And while I believe the primary mission was to put Elizabeth where she could help Lady Mackenzie, I also think Gabe and Elizabeth are meant to be together. Elsie thought it better not to mention that the rift between Elizabeth and her parents needed to be mended as well. I don't believe any of this. Then perhaps you should call Dr. Rose now. After you told me he believes this nonsense? Not a chance. I need to get you out of that quack's clutches. Fear rose in Elsie like hot bile. Telling Elizabeth's mother had been a huge mistake. Please, you must believe me. What would it take to prove it to you? There are other people who have used the pocket watch. I would need their permission first, but perhaps talking to one of them would help. Talking to similarly deluded people will not change my mind. Nothing short of... what did you call the old woman? Gertrude? Well, nothing short of Gertrude stepping in off that balcony and offering me the pocket watch will convince me that this isn't a well-developed delusion. Before Elsie could respond, A tap came at the balcony door. She glanced that direction, but the drapes were drawn. "How did you do that?" Charlotte demanded. "I didn't do anything." The tap came again. "There is no access to that balcony from anywhere but those doors. You must be doing something. Stop it this instant." "I swear I'm not—" The balcony door slid open, and Charlotte jumped to her feet just as Gertrude pulled the draperies aside and stepped into the room. "I am not in the habit of entering without an invitation, but I fear you'd have left me standing out in the cold all night. Besides, you did say that the only way you would be convinced that Elsie is telling you the truth would be if I stepped in off the balcony and offered you the pocket watch. I'll accept that as an invitation." "Who are you, and how did you get out there?" "I'm Gertrude." "How long have you been hiding out there?" "You know I wasn't hiding out there. You stepped out to look at the skyline right before you drew the curtains, and you haven't left since then." "You could only know that if you had been hiding out there." "Where would I hide, lass? I'm a rather conspicuous size." "This is impossible. People can't just appear from nowhere." She rounded on Elizabeth. "How did you set this up? How did you know I'd... Say you'd believe her if I stepped in off the balcony? She didn't, and people can't just appear from nowhere. However, I can. I am one of the ancients, just as Elsie told you." "And why are you calling her Elsie? I haven't called her that since she was a little girl." "I call her Elsie because that's the name she goes by. She is not your daughter, Elizabeth." Charlotte sat down, looking bewildered. Elsie moved to sit beside her, placing an arm around her shoulders. Charlotte looked her in the eye. "Elizabeth, why are you doing this? Why is it so important to draw me into this delusion? You need help, my darling." "I'm so sorry to have caused you this distress. Truly I am. But it isn't a delusion. Elizabeth accepted the watch and, well, here we are." What else could she say? "Do you mind if I sit down?" asked Gertrude. Charlotte nodded her head absently. Gertrude settled herself in the chair across from them. She reached in her pocket and pulled out the pocket watch. Opening it, she held it so Charlotte could see its single hand pointing to 6. "Elsie has been here for 30 days. There are 30 days left to switch places again, before the exchange becomes permanent." "You expect me to just believe that? Did you hypnotize Elizabeth? Is that why she's in the fugue?" Gertrude sighed. "There are some people who simply refuse to take anything on faith. Charlotte, we actually met years ago." "I think not. I certainly would remember being offered a time-traveling pocket watch." Her voice was thick with disdain. Gertrude smiled indulgently. "I'm sure you would have, if I had offered it to you then. But I didn't. I don't remember ever meeting you. Perhaps I can help you a bit. Do you remember going to the New York World's Fair in 1964? Charlotte canted her head. "Yes. You were 18 at the time, and you had gone with some friends who had managed to get tickets to Les Poupées de Paris." Charlotte smiled for the first time. "The adult puppet show with the naked puppets. It was scandalous, and everyone wanted to see it. I'd forgotten all about that." "But you didn't see it?" "No, because you had seen the boy you were dating waiting in line with another girl. If I recall correctly, he was practically eating her." Charlotte blushed but chuckled. "Well, he was. I'd never seen anyone kissing like that before. Now that I think back, his technique was awful. But at the time, your heart was in tatters. You ran away in tears and didn't go to the show. I found you sitting on a bench, crying. That couldn't have been you. It was 40 years ago, and that woman would have to be well over 100. She looked to be about the age you are now." Charlotte looked at Gertrude as if really seeing her for the first time. "It can't be. I sat with you and listened as you poured your heart out to me. We chatted for a bit, and you decided you were well shot of him before long. Then we walked around the fair, marvelling about all of the futuristic ideas being presented. It was you. Gertrude nodded. Yes, it was. And at one point I asked you if you could, would you take a trip to the future? I remember that. Dear God, you were serious? I was indeed. But you said nay, you'd rather meet each day as it came. 'Twas a very good answer, and an excellent philosophy, so you didn't need the watch. Charlotte looked from Gertrude to Elsie. But you came to the future. Not exactly by choice, as I told you. Elizabeth is as discontent a soul as I have encountered in ages. She longed to practice medicine as it once was, and yet she never slowed down enough to look around and experience each day as it came. She was always charging forward, planning 3 moves ahead. She was never happy. Charlotte looked away for a moment, her eyes becoming bright with tears. I guess I stopped living by the philosophy of my 18-year-old self at some point. By the time we had Elizabeth, James and I were building our careers. She learned her perpetual forward motion from us. Yes, she did. Charlotte looked wryly at her. You don't sugarcoat anything, do you? Why would I do that? The fact is, many people create the circumstances in which they find themselves. To let them believe otherwise accomplishes nothing. But Elizabeth is well. Extremely well. The pace of her life has slowed down, and she is finding exactly what she sought. Charlotte turned her attention to Elsie, taking her hand. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. This has to have been beyond frightening, especially since you didn't choose this path, and we certainly made it no easier for you. It was scary at first, but I'm getting used to it. Dr. Rose has been a huge help. Does Dr. Soldani know? Elsie shook her head. And you believe he and Elizabeth are meant to be together? I don't know why I would feel so strongly about him otherwise. From the first moment I saw him, I felt it. It had to be one of her memories influencing that. What do you think, Gertrude? I think the universe is unfolding as it should. Chapter 22. Once Charlotte finally believed Elsie was not delusional, she'd been full of questions. She fired them off at Elsie, one after another in rapid succession. Elsie was reminded of when Mrs. Soldani scolded Angela for doing much the same thing. Eventually Gertrude put up a hand. Charlotte, I know the lawyer in you wants to know all the details, but you can't learn it all in one night. And it's getting late. I must be going. Charlotte took Elsie's hand. I'm sorry, Elsie. I'll hold my other questions for now. Elsie smiled and nodded. I understand. Really, I do. I don't mind answering your questions, but I am tired. They said goodbye to Gertrude, and Charlotte called for a driver. She rode with Elsie and saw her all the way to the apartment. She frowned when she saw the interior. Oh dear, this is tiny. Elsie nodded. But I like it. It's cozy. Charlotte smiled. I'm sure it is. Well, I should be getting to bed myself. Tomorrow is an insanely busy day. I'm glad you told me everything. I know it was hard to believe, really hard to believe, but I'm glad you know. Elsie frowned. She didn't want to cause any hurt feelings, but she really needed to say something. Charlotte picked up on Elsie's hesitation. I can tell you want to say something. I'm sorry, but I am a little worried about something. What is it? It was so very hard for you to accept my story that you believed I had a serious psychological problem and were prepared to sue Dr. Rose and Gabe. It took an appearance from Gertrude for you to believe it. I'm sorry, darling. It's my nature to question things. I know, and I think it will be even harder to convince Elizabeth's father. In fact, I don't think he could be convinced, even if Gertrude materialized out of thin air directly in front of him. Ah, I see where you're going, and you're right. As much as I hate to keep this from him, we must. I think that's best. I suppose you should also keep calling me Elizabeth. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Your father and I called you Elsie for years. When you started school, and the teacher used your given name, you insisted on being called Elizabeth, and wouldn't answer if we called you anything else. I like calling you Elsie. It actually makes me feel closer to Elizabeth, at least to the Elizabeth I knew before we all went our separate paths. Everyone will understand if I call you Elsie. Okay, honestly, I'd like it too. Good. And another thing, Elsie, I would like to continue spending time with you. Gertrude was right. Elizabeth has grown very distant from us, and it is our fault. I had to make more time in my life for her because of all of this. I don't want that time to fill up again before she returns. Elsie smiled. I'd like that. Excellent. Perhaps we could spend Wednesday afternoon together again. Lunch, Dr. Rose, and shopping? That sounds perfect. To Elsie's surprise, Charlotte gave her a kiss on the cheek. Good night, Elsie. The rest of the week seemed to drag by. As planned, Elsie spent Wednesday afternoon with Charlotte and Tuesday and Thursday with her own mother. But Friday belonged to Gabe. He'd explained that he would normally have to work one more night, but he had made some changes to be off for Joe's birthday. I'll be working days, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, and then an extra Friday night in a few weeks. I'm just going to sleep a little now. Otherwise I won't sleep tonight, and I'll be trashed tomorrow. Even with Charlotte and Joe keeping her busy during the day, Elsie still hadn't slept all that well. She longed to curl up next to him for a while, so she told him so. Sweetheart, if you come to bed with me, we won't sleep, and it was a crazy night. I need a little rest. When I get up, we'll go do something touristy. She sighed heavily. All right. He chuckled and gave her a kiss. Don't let me sleep for more than 3 hours. She nodded. Okay. I mean it, Elizabeth. No matter what I say, absolutely no more than 3 hours. Don't take no for an answer. Promise me. I promise. She thought the warning and the promise he forced from her was silly, until 3 hours later when he groaned and rolled over. I'm exhausted. Wake me in another hour. You said not to take no for an answer. I know I did, but 1 more hour will be okay. You made me promise. I know I did, but I really need another hour. It'll be fine. Gabe. It's just an hour, Elizabeth. Let me sleep for another hour. His tone was a little sharp, so she decided to give him the hour he requested. Then his words came back to her. No matter what I say, absolutely no more than 3 hours. She smiled to herself. Challenge accepted. Wardrobe change required. She stripped off her clothes and slipped into the bedroom. She watched him sleeping for a minute. With his face completely relaxed and his curly black hair tousled on the pillow, he looked almost boyish. I hope you remember that you asked for this. She padded over to the bed and climbed on next to him. She began stroking his body softly. Clearly enjoying her touch, even in his semi-conscious state, he rolled toward her. She rose up on her knees, replacing her hands with her lips, sprinkling kisses across his chest and down his stomach. He gave a contented sigh, but didn't open his eyes. Her touch became more insistent. She stroked and kissed his chiseled muscles, pulling the covers back and moving lower. When she reached his manhood, she wrapped a hand round it, stroking it tentatively at first, and then with increasing confidence. He opened one eye and emitted a low, rumbling growl. Don't worry. You've had your 3 hours of sleep, but if you don't wish to wake, you needn't. Even as she said it, she crawled on top, straddling him. "Still, you might regret sleeping through this." His eyes flew open. The shocked look on his face brought on a fit of laughter. After a moment he began to chuckle. "I did say not to take no for an answer." "You did?" "Well then, do your worst." She took his rigid length in her hand, guiding it toward her opening and lowering herself onto him. He filled her, stretched her, completed her. She rose up on her knees and slowly sank down again. She moved her hips in a small circle, and the sensation was exquisite. She repeated the action again and again, finding a rhythm that suited her. As she rode him, she was vaguely aware of how much control she had, her movements, her speed, her pleasure. Based on his moans of bliss, her pleasure was clearly his too. He cupped his hands around her breasts, massaging and teasing the firm peaks. As her need built, she was no longer satisfied with the steady pace she'd set. She increased it, rising higher, falling faster, and burying him even deeper within her. The feeling was sublime, and she reached her climax almost without warning. The world shimmered around her, and she was lost in pure sensation. She was barely aware of Gabe's primal groan and the heat that filled her as she floated back to consciousness. She collapsed on his chest, panting and sated. He wrapped his arms around her, gently moving her to his side. He kissed the top of her head. "That is, hands down, the best wake-up call I've ever received." She chuckled. "You said not to take no for an answer. And I meant it. I'd say I'm sorry that I didn't wake when you first tried, but honestly, since I so enjoyed your creative solution, I'm not sorry in the least." He kissed her again. "Let's go have a shower and go explore the city." He climbed out of bed and froze. "Elizabeth, you didn't use a condom." She frowned. "What's a condom?" "Sweetheart, it's the sheath I cover myself with every time we have sex, so you don't become pregnant." She knew that he did that, but didn't know what it was for. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Oh, God, I should have explained it. I just assumed. Damn it." "Gabe, I'm sorry." He put 2 fingers to his forehead. "It's not your fault. Sometimes it's hard to remember that you aren't exactly Dr. Elizabeth Quinn at the moment." He shook his head and smiled. "Don't worry. It happened, and the universe unfolds as it should." Gabe had suffered a moment of panic when he realized that they'd had sex without protection. He'd never done that before, and it weighed heavily on him for several hours. But as he spent the day with light-hearted, adventurous Elizabeth, his worries dissolved. It didn't matter. He loved her. He intended to marry her and have lots of children with her. If they had just started one, then it was God's will. If they hadn't, that too was ordained. Just as Gabe had told Elizabeth in the moment, the universe unfolds as it should. That night he slept with her spooned against him. This was right. This was perfect. He never wanted to be without her again. Work over the next 3 days sped by, punctuated at the end of the day with mind-numbing sex and a sound night's sleep with the woman he loved. Before Elizabeth landed in his life, he'd planned to escape the city for the whole week of Joe's birthday. He could catch a late train home when he got off Monday evening, and he wouldn't have to return until the next Monday evening because he didn't have to be at work again until the following Tuesday. However, he massaged those plans a bit. He enjoyed the feel of her in his arms as he slept at night, and her absolute abandon when he made love to her, much too much to tolerate the forced separation imposed by his mother. He might have considered going down on Saturday night and back on Monday morning, but Friday was St. Patrick's Day, and the city would be crazier than usual. He settled on going down early Thursday afternoon, before the evening rush hour, but after he'd spent the morning in carnal pursuits with his beloved. When they arrived at the Hamilton train station, Angie was there to pick them up. We're going to drop you off, Gabe, and then I'm taking Elizabeth to shop for prom dresses. Angie, can't that wait? Prom is months away. Wait, months? You were totally clueless. Do you think a girl just goes out the week before and picks something? Jesus, almost all the other girls have theirs already. I just waited this long because I wanted Elizabeth to go with me. Mom's already seen the ones I'm considering. I've narrowed it down to 4, but I want another opinion. Gabe smiled at Elizabeth. Do you mind? Elizabeth laughed. I'm not sure I completely understand, but I think Angie needs a dress for something important, so she's picked out several and wants my opinion of them. He nodded. That's the gist of it. No, I don't mind. Elizabeth and Angie came in the house long enough to say hello to his mother and for Angie to get the shoes she intended to wear to prom. Once the girls were gone, Gabe and Luke sat at the kitchen table to chat with their mother as she made ravioli. Is that what's for dinner? Gabe asked hopefully. No, it's for Joe's birthday dinner on Sunday. We're having patches tonight. Gabe grinned. Patches were the leftover pieces of pasta dough that his mom cooked and served with meatballs. I love patches. I know you do. That's why I made the pasta today instead of yesterday. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. Do you need any help? No, I'm almost done with this. But then I need you. For the next few minutes, Luke entertained them with stories of high school from a teacher's point of view. When his mom was finished and had washed the flour off her hands, she said, Okay, you can come with me now. It won't take long. I've been sorting out closets and things, trying to get rid of stuff that we'll never use. I have boxes for each of you to go through. Luke and Angela have already taken care of theirs, and I was hoping you, Nick, and Tony can sort yours this weekend. Since Angela is entertaining Elizabeth at the moment, can you come upstairs with me and take a look at yours? Sure, Mom, I'd be happy to. This was perfect. Gabe wanted to speak with his mother alone. When they got upstairs to her bedroom, there were 3 boxes against one wall. His mother put one on the bed and sat on her vanity stool while he explored the contents. It was mostly full of old clothes and a few participation trophies. Mom, I don't think I need to keep any of this. That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure. I also wondered if you still wanted your grandfather's mandolin. You haven't played it in years. If you don't want it, I thought one of your cousins might like it. I'd forgotten about it. Yeah, I'd like to have that. I'll take it back with me this time. If you do, I want to hear you play it once in a while. There's no sense letting it gather dust. He laughed. I will, Mom, I promise. She canted her head to one side. Really, I will. Okay, that's all I have for you to sort. Mom, since we have a minute, I want to ask you something. His mother's eyes narrowed. You can always ask me anything, as long as you're willing to hear the answer. He smiled. I know, Mom, and you're just like Mary Poppins, practically perfect in every way. So what is it you want to ask? I really love Elizabeth. I want to ask her to marry me, not immediately, but soon. You always said Grandma's engagement ring would be for my bride. I'd like to have it for when I'm ready. She frowned, looking very serious, but opened a drawer in her dresser and took the faded velvet box from where it was hidden among her socks. She walked to the bed and sat down beside him. We need to talk for a few minutes. Gabe sighed. This wasn't going to be easy. Sure, Mom. Gabriel, this ring is yours, and I will give it to you. However, I'm going to ask you to think long and hard before you ask that girl to marry you. Mom, I love her. I've loved her for years. And she broke your heart once, which, quite frankly, makes me not like her so much. It was a misunderstanding. That's right, because she is from a different world. She isn't like us. But that's just it. She wants to be like us. I think she's always wanted to belong to a family like ours. Her parents have been closer to some teachers than they are to their daughter. After the accident, she didn't want to go to Baltimore, but her dad tried to have her declared incompetent so he could force her. Her mom is coming around a little. I think the accident scared her. As it should have. I agree. They've lived separate lives for years. Do you remember how I thought what Elizabeth said that day about not believing they'd come to her graduation was a pathetic lie? Yes, I do. And I agreed with you. Well, I found out from an old friend of hers that it wasn't a lie. Her parents hadn't attended her high school or college graduation, and she'd been valedictorian at both of them. She had no reason to think they would be there. His mother pursed her lips in disapproval. I know, right? Be that as it may, you're ignoring something very important here. She's lost all her memories. That's just it, Mom. The one memory she hasn't lost is loving me. I was the one who walked out before, not her. His mother smiled. Exactly. Maybe she did love you. Maybe she harbors some love for you still that she latched onto at a time when it was all that was familiar to her. But what happens when her memory returns? What if she doesn't love you? What if she was as hurt by the breakup as you were, and she wants nothing to do with you? I don't think that will happen. This thing between us, I can't describe it. Hormones? Mom, I'm teasing, but I really don't think you should jump into marriage with her just yet. Give it some time. Maybe wait until she gets her memories back. I won't jump into anything. I promise. She arched an eyebrow at him. But you still want the ring. He smiled. I still want the ring. She shook her head and put the box into his hand.